Every cop will tell you the same thing. Your cruiser is your fortress. Steel frame, reinforced glass, a cage partition between you and whatever climbs in the back. You've got your radio, your weapons, your lights. It's the one place on a shift where you're supposed to feel completely in control, completely safe. But here's the thing nobody tells you at the academy. A cage works both ways. Welcome back to Midnight Patrol Files. I'm Michael. If you're new here, this channel is where I sit down and tell you the stories that never made it into any official report. The kind that follow you home after a 30-year career and never fully let go. If true, unexplained stories from the graveyard shift are something you can't get enough of, hit that subscribe button right now and stay with me, because what I'm about to tell you is the single most disturbing thing I have ever experienced in uniform, and I've got the garage footage to prove it. Underscore 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 underscore. It was the third week of January. I won't tell you what year or what state, but I will tell you that it was the kind of cold that makes your face hurt the second you step outside. The kind of cold where your coffee goes lukewarm before you've even had 3 sips. I was 12 hours deep into a 14-hour shift, and I hadn't slept properly in 2 days. My eyes were burning. My lower back was a solid knot of tension. The kind of tired that doesn't just live in your body, it gets inside your head and starts turning everything gray. The roads that night were practically empty. A few long-haul trucks on the interstate. One drunk I'd already pulled over and sent home in a cab around midnight, and then nothing. Just me and the hum of the engine and about 4 inches of old snow packed against the shoulders of every road I patrolled. At just past 4 in the morning, I was running a loop out toward the edge of my patrol zone, a stretch of rural 2-lane that took you over Black Creek Bridge. Now I want you to picture this road. There are no lights out there, not a single street lamp for the better part of 3 miles. On both sides of the road, the tree line presses in close, bare black branches catching the wind, and the bridge itself sits over a gorge that drops about 60 feet down to a half-frozen creek. In daylight, it's just a bridge. At 4 in the morning in January, with the ice crystals coming off the water in the darkness below, it feels like the edge of the world. I'd crossed that bridge probably 200 times in my career. Never once gave it much thought. That night was different. My headlights swept around the last bend before the bridge and caught something sitting dead center in my lane. I eased off the gas immediately, my hand going to the door instinctively, the way it always does when something doesn't fit. And whatever was out there, it didn't fit at all. I rolled up slow and let my cruiser's lights flood the full width of the bridge. It was a rocking chair, a wooden rocking chair, old, painted white with the paint peeling off in long strips. It was sitting perfectly upright, absolutely still, right in the middle of my lane, like someone had carried it out there and set it down with tremendous care. Like they'd taken a moment to make sure the legs sat level on the asphalt. It wasn't tipped over. It wasn't damaged. There was no vehicle nearby, no tire tracks cutting off onto a shoulder, no hazard lights blinking in the distance. Just the chair and the dark and the wind coming up off that gorge. I sat there for a moment. I remember my eyes moving automatically to the tree line on both sides. Old habit. You always check the tree line. Nothing moved. No figures, no silhouettes, no flashlight beams, just the bare trees rattling in the wind. I radioed in that I had a road obstruction on Black Creek Bridge and that I was handling it. Dispatch acknowledged. That was it. I put the cruiser in park, left the engine running because it was well below freezing, left the doors unlocked because I was going to be 10 feet away for 30 seconds at most. I had no reason to think anything in the world was wrong except for the deeply strange fact of a rocking chair sitting on a bridge at 4 in the morning. I stepped out into the cold and it hit me like a wall. The wind off that gorge had a bite to it that went straight through my jacket, straight through my vest. My breath came out in a cloud and vanished. I walked around the front of the cruiser into the full beam of my headlights, squinting against the brightness, and I grabbed the back of that rocking chair with both gloved hands. It was heavier than I expected, solid hardwood, old, the kind of furniture somebody's grandmother owned for 50 years. I dragged it off to the far shoulder, felt the leg scrape against the asphalt, and I shoved it up over the guardrail into the scrub brush on the other side. I straightened up, turned my collar against the wind, and looked out over the gorge for a second. The creek below was barely visible, a pale silver thread between black rocks. That was when I felt it, that very specific, deeply uncomfortable feeling that I was not alone on that bridge. The hair on the back of my neck stood up so hard it was almost painful. I turned and looked back at the tree line. Nothing. Looked down the road in both directions. Nothing. Looked at my cruiser sitting there with its lights on, exhaust trailing out the back in a soft white plume. And I told myself I was exhausted and that 12 hours into a shift your mind starts inventing things to be afraid of. I told myself the wind was playing tricks. I turned around and I walked back to my cruiser and I got in. The first thing I noticed was the cold. Now I had left the engine running. The heat had been cranked for most of the shift. The inside of that car should have been warm or at least close to it, but when I closed the door behind me, the air inside was frigid. Not just cool, frigid, like something cold had been breathing in there. I leaned forward and checked the vents. They were blowing warm. I turned up the heat another notch and sat there for a second with my hands in front of the dashboard. Then I noticed the smell. It was faint, but it was there. Something stale and dark, like swamp water, like something that had been sitting still in standing water for a very long time. I looked around the cab out of habit and saw nothing. Checked the back through the partition, empty the way it had been all night. I figured maybe some runoff from the gorge had gotten into the undercarriage. Maybe the wind had pushed some brackish air off the creek up through the vents. I was tired enough that any explanation felt reasonable. I drove the last 90 minutes of my shift without incident, filled out my end-of-watch paperwork, handed off my keys at the lot, and went home. I slept for 9 hours. I didn't think about the rocking chair again until the following afternoon when my phone rang and the fleet maintenance supervisor told me to come down to the garage. His name was Pete. He'd worked maintenance for the department for over 15 years. I'd known him a long time. When I came through the garage door that afternoon, he was standing next to a workbench with his arms crossed, looking at a laptop screen like it had personally offended him. There were 2 other guys in the garage. When I walked in, they both went quiet and found somewhere else to be. That alone made my stomach tighten. I asked Pete what was going on. He told me that the rear door sensor on my cruiser had logged an anomaly during my shift the previous night. The sensor registered the rear passenger door opening and closing twice during a period of time when I was recorded as stationary. They pulled the interior cabin camera footage as a matter of routine protocol. Pete looked at me for a long moment. Then he said that he wasn't going to describe what was on the tape. He was just going to show me. He pressed play. The footage was black and white, grainy the way cabin cameras always are, wide angle, taking in the entire interior from a forward-mounted position. You could see the partition, the back seat, the cage, the rear floorboards. The timestamp ran in the bottom corner. I watched myself driving. I watched myself checking my mirrors. I watched myself radio dispatch about the rocking chair. And then the camera showed my cruiser coming to a stop at the bridge. The timestamp matched. I watched myself get out of the car. And then my mouth went completely dry. From the rear floorboard of the back seat in the dark space on the far side of the cage partition, something moved. A hand came up first. Long, pale fingers, sickly white against the dark floor, wrapping themselves over the edge of the rear seat like something pulling itself up from underwater. The hand was followed by an arm, a limb that seemed far too long and far too thin to belong to a proportional human being. And then, with the slow, deliberate stillness of something that had been waiting patiently for a very long time, a figure unfolded itself from the floor of my back seat. Tall, impossibly thin, its clothing, if you could call it that, hung off it in dark, wet strips, and its skin, what the camera caught of it, was streaked with dark mud. Its head nearly touched the roof of the interior. It had been folded down into that floorboard for God only knows how long. The back of it no more than 3 or 4 inches from the rear of my headrest, 3 or 4 inches from the back of my neck, all shift long. I had to put my hand on Pete's workbench to stay upright. The figure stood there for a moment, perfectly still, and then it turned toward the interior camera just for a second, and I can't tell you what I saw on that face because my brain has refused to fully process it every time I've tried. Then it turned its head toward the window, watching me on the bridge outside, watching me drag that rocking chair to the guardrail, watching me stand there looking down at the gorge. On the tape, I started walking back toward the cruiser. The figure moved toward the opposite rear door, the one away from the dash cam, the one facing the tree line. The door sensor registered the open, and the figure stepped out, and in the tree line beyond the shoulder it was simply gone. By the time I got back in the car, the rear door was already closed again and the back seat was empty. The chair was bait. Whatever that thing was, it had positioned that chair to stop me, to get me out of my vehicle, to give itself a way out. Which means it had been planning it. Which means it knew what it was doing. I stood in that garage for a long time after Pete closed the laptop. He asked me if I was okay. I told him I honestly had no idea. He told me they were logging the footage as an unresolved incident and leaving it at that. I requested a different patrol zone the following week. Nobody asked me why. I finished out the last 2 years of my career. I never drove Black Creek Bridge again at night, not once. And every single shift from that night forward, before I got into any vehicle, I checked the back seat every time. I don't care how it looks, and I don't care if you're a 22-year veteran with nothing left to prove. You check the back seat. Here's what I want to leave you with tonight. We spend a lot of time worrying about what's outside the car, what's on the other side of the door, what's waiting in the dark at the edge of your headlights. We almost never think about what might already be inside, right behind us, patient, quiet, waiting for us to stop. So I want to ask you something before you go to sleep tonight. When you get to your car in a dark parking lot, or a quiet street, or a lonely road at 2 a.m, do you check the back seat before you get in? Because here's what 30 years of patrol taught me. The thing that gets you is never the thing you're looking at. If this story got under your skin the way it still gets under mine, hit that like button. Subscribe to Midnight Patrol Files because I've got a whole career's worth of nights I haven't talked about yet, and some of them make this one look ordinary. Drop a comment below and tell me if you always check that back seat. And if you don't, you might want to start. Stay safe out there. I'll see you on the next shift.